The global health community is currently confronting a significant escalation in hantavirus surveillance following a multi-country outbreak linked to a Dutch-flagged cruise vessel, the MV Hondius. As of May 12, 2026, international health agencies are grappling with the emergence of a mutated strain of the Andes hantavirus, a development that has prompted a stark assessment of current medical countermeasures. The incident began on April 1, 2026, when the vessel departed from Ushuaia, Argentina, for a transatlantic voyage. It has since evolved into a critical case study of viral transmission in confined environments. Reports indicate that an index case developed severe symptoms including fever, headache, and gastrointestinal distress on April 6, shortly after the voyage commenced, and subsequently died on board on April 11. What initially appeared to be an isolated incident has expanded into a cluster of at least 8 cases, with 3 confirmed deaths across multiple jurisdictions, including South Africa and Switzerland. This situation is particularly concerning to public health officials because the Andes strain is the only known hantavirus capable of sustained, albeit limited, human-to-human transmission. The World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are now focusing on the biological profile of this specific pathogen, which has demonstrated a high fatality rate. Hantaviruses are a family of viruses primarily hosted by rodent reservoirs, typically spreading to humans through the inhalation of aerosolized excreta. However, the current outbreak on the MV Hondius has highlighted the risks of close contact transmission, a phenomenon rare in the broader category of hantaviruses but characteristic of the Andes variant. As researchers sequence the viral genome, the pharmaceutical industry is facing scrutiny over the efficacy of existing vaccines. While vaccines against the Hantan and Seoul strains have been utilized in parts of East Asia, notably China and South Korea, major pharmaceutical developers are now acknowledging that these older formulations offer virtually no protection against the highly pathogenic New World strains, such as the mutated Andes virus currently in circulation. This no-shield scenario leaves supportive hospital care as the only viable treatment path for those infected, as no specific antiviral therapy has been approved for hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. The framing of this story is not merely one of a localized cruise ship infection, but a broader indictment of global vaccine preparedness for zoonotic threats that cross international borders through modern travel and logistics networks. Core developments in the tracking of the MV Hondius cluster have involved a massive coordination effort between the World Health Organization, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, and national laboratories across 3 continents. Genomic sequencing conducted at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in South Africa and Geneva University Hospitals has identified the presence of orthohantavirus andescens, or the Andes virus. Specifically, researchers have noted synonymous mutations within the viral L segment. While these single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, do not necessarily alter the protein structure of the virus, their consistent presence across cases suggests a single zoonotic spillover event followed by subsequent transmission among passengers. The logistical complexity of the response is immense. On May 7, 2026, a specialized CDC team was dispatched to meet the ship in the Canary Islands following its stop in Cape Verde. Simultaneously, American passengers are being repatriated to specialized biocontainment facilities in Nebraska for further monitoring. The divergence between official statements and the reality of medical preparedness has become a focal point of the investigation. While the European Commission recently highlighted that hantaviruses were included in the 2025 Health Threat Prioritization Assessment, the practical availability of medical countermeasures remains non-existent. Internal reports from vaccine developers indicate that the genetic distance between the Old World Hantan virus and the New World Andes virus is too great for cross-neutralization. This means that the millions of doses of Hantavax and related vaccines produced for the Asian market are functionally useless against the current outbreak. Laboratory testing has confirmed that of the current symptomatic individuals, several have rapidly progressed to pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is characteristic of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Contrastingly, some suspected cases in the Netherlands have returned negative PCR results, highlighting the difficulty of clinical diagnosis in the early stages when symptoms mimic common influenza or even avian flu. The World Organization for Animal Health has joined the response, noting that 75% of emerging infectious diseases originate in animal populations, yet surveillance at the animal-human interface remains underfunded. In France, the Pasteur Institute's National Reference Center for Hantaviruses is already reporting 19 unrelated cases for the first quarter of 2026, suggesting a general increase in hantavirus activity globally. The data indicates that while the risk to the general public in the United States and Europe remains categorized as very low, the inability of existing pharmaceutical shields to stop this mutated strain has forced a reliance on strict isolation and quarantine measures rather than biological. Prevention. Prevention and public guidance in the wake of the Andes virus mutation remains centered on traditional non-pharmaceutical interventions. Public health agencies are stressing that in domestic and agricultural settings, the primary defense against hantavirus remains the rigorous control of rodent populations and the avoidance of dust-raising activities in areas where rodents may be present. For the general public, the risk of contracting the virus through everyday social contact, such as in schools or workplaces, is practically non-existent, given that hantavirus does not spread easily through the air over long distances like influenza. However, for travelers and those in endemic regions of South America, the guidance is much more stringent. Officials recommend that anyone who has been in close contact with an infected individual monitor their health for up to 6 weeks, the upper limit of the known incubation period. Surveillance efforts are also being intensified at major transportation hubs. The case of a passenger who died in Johannesburg after flying from South America serves as a grim reminder of how quickly zoonotic threats can move across the globe. There are honest limits to current scientific knowledge regarding the full extent of this mutation's impact on human-to-human transmission efficiency. While the WHO has reassured the public that this is not the start of a new pandemic, the really close contact observed on the MV Hondius, including shared cabins and shared bodily fluids, is being studied to determine if the virus has evolved to be more stable in human environments. The European Commission has confirmed it is now funding the development of second-generation vaccines, but these are years away from clinical approval. For now, the global health response relies on early detection and the provision of intensive care support, including mechanical ventilation and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, which are the only factors that consistently lower the mortality rate of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome from its current level of 30 to 60%. As the MV Hondius continues its journey under strict quarantine, the medical community is left with a sobering reality. Despite decades of research, we remain without a pharmaceutical shield against one of the most lethal viruses in the Americas. Vigilance and environmental management are the only tools left in the shed until a broad-spectrum hantavirus vaccine can be realized. For more updates on this developing public health story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The operational response to the MV Hondius cluster has expanded into a complex multi-agency coordination effort involving the World Health Organization, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, and the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. On May 7, 2026, a specialized CDC rapid response team was dispatched to intercept the vessel at the Canary Islands following its previous stop in Cape Verde. The logistics of this operation are particularly sensitive, as the vessel is carrying passengers from multiple nations, necessitating a synchronized international quarantine protocol. In the United States, federal health officials have activated high-level biocontainment protocols. American passengers are currently being repatriated to the University of Nebraska medical centers, specialized facilities for observation and treatment. This move underscores the severity of the Andes virus variant, which remains the only hantavirus strain documented to undergo human-to-human transmission. While the risk of a widespread community outbreak is currently categorized as very low, the presence of 3 confirmed deaths and at least 8 symptomatic cases on a single vessel has forced a pivot in global surveillance strategies, at the molecular level. The core of the current investigation lies in genomic sequencing performed at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in South Africa and Geneva University Hospitals in Switzerland. Scientists have identified the pathogen as a mutated form of hantavirus Andes. Technical analysis of the viral L segment has revealed several synonymous mutations. In virology, these single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, do not alter the amino acid sequence of the viral proteins, but they serve as critical genetic markers. These silent mutations have allowed researchers to trace the lineage of the infection with high precision, confirming that the virus circulating on the ship originated from a single zoonotic spillover event before spreading among the passengers through close contact. The biological data confirms that this is not a routine seasonal fluctuation, but a specific identifiable mutation that has maintained high virulence as it moved from the index case to subsequent patients. The development of medical countermeasures has hit a significant roadblock, creating a stark contrast between official public health goals and current pharmaceutical capabilities. Internal reports and statements from major vaccine manufacturers indicate a massive gap in protection. While hantavirus vaccines like Hantavax have been utilized effectively in East Asia for decades to combat the Han and Sol strains, those vaccines were developed using Old World virus lineages. Pharmaceutical scientists are now acknowledging that there is virtually no cross-neutralization between these established vaccines and the New World Andes virus. The genetic divergence between the two is simply too vast, rendering existing stockpiles functionally useless against this mutated South American strain. This admission has drawn attention to the European Commission's 2025 Health Threat Prioritization Assessment, which identified hantaviruses as a high priority threat, yet failed to secure the development of a broad-spectrum or New World-specific vaccine candidate before this outbreak occurred. Clinical developments on the ground further illustrate the diagnostic challenges facing hospitals. In the Netherlands, health officials are investigating several suspected cases, though many initial reports have been complicated by the overlapping symptoms of other respiratory pathogens. Early PCR testing in some European clinics has returned negative results for hantavirus, while testing positive for seasonal influenza, highlighting the difficulty of differential diagnosis during the early prodromal phase of the illness. However, for those on the MV Hondius and their direct contacts, the clinical progression has been more definitive. Patients have rapidly moved from initial fever and myalgia to acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, requiring immediate intubation. Lab reports from the Pasteur Institute's National Reference Center in France suggest that, while the mutation has not necessarily increased the speed of the virus, it has maintained its deadly efficiency in the absence of a pharmaceutical shield. As the investigation continues, the focus remains on the disconnect between the rapid global movement of modern travel and the lagging pace of specialized vaccine production for zoonotic threats. As the global medical community adapts to the reality that current pharmaceutical shields are ineffective against this mutated Andes hantavirus strain, the strategy for containment has shifted toward aggressive surveillance and traditional public health interventions. Public guidance for those traveling from or residing in endemic areas of South America remains focused on the primary transmission vector, the long-tailed pygmy rice rat. However, given the unique ability of the Andes strain to spread between humans, the World Health Organization has issued updated protocols for close contact monitoring. The incubation period for hantavirus can extend up to 6 weeks, meaning that anyone exposed on the MV Hondius or through subsequent transmission chains must remain under active health surveillance for a full 42 days. For the general public, the risk remains concentrated in specific ecological niches, yet the no-shield admission from major pharmaceutical developers underscores a critical vulnerability in our global health infrastructure. Officials are emphasizing that in the absence of a vaccine, the only effective prevention method is the rigorous management of environments where rodents thrive. This includes sealing entry points in homes and using professional-grade disinfectants on surfaces. A critical practical takeaway for anyone cleaning potentially infested areas is to avoid sweeping or vacuuming, which can aerosolize viral particles. Instead, A solution of bleach and water should be used to saturate nesting materials or droppings before they are handled. The surveillance of this outbreak is now a test of the international health regulations updated in the mid-2020s. With the death of a passenger in Johannesburg and another in Switzerland, the logistical tracking of every individual who moved through the MV Hondius's cabins and common areas is a massive undertaking. National health agencies are utilizing manifest data to contact trace every passenger who disembarked prior to the official quarantine. This is particularly vital because the symptoms of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, which includes sudden onset of high fever, deep muscle aches, and fatigue, can be easily mistaken for other respiratory illnesses in their early stages. The clinical limit of our current knowledge is a point of concern for health ministers, while the mutations found in the L segment of this specific virus suggest a single origin. The extent to which these genetic changes might enhance human-to-human stability is still being studied in high-containment laboratories. Until those studies are conclusive, the working assumption is that any close, sustained contact poses a transmission risk. The ethical and practical implications of the pharmaceutical industry's admission regarding vaccine failure cannot be overstated. For decades, the reliance on old-world vaccines for new-world threats has created a false sense of security that has now been dismantled by the emergence of this mutated Andes strain. This leaves the medical community with only supportive care as a treatment option. In severe cases, this involves the use of mechanical ventilation and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, to oxygenate the blood outside the body while the lungs recover. However, the availability of such advanced life support systems is unevenly distributed globally, raising significant questions about health equity should the virus spread to regions with less developed medical infrastructure. The World Organization for Animal Health has reiterated that because 75% of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic, the lack of a proactive vaccine strategy for hantaviruses represents a systemic failure in pandemic preparedness. The current situation serves as a stark reminder of the limits of modern medicine when faced with a rapidly evolving pathogen. As of May 12, 2026, the global health community remains in a state of high alert, balancing the need for transparency with the goal of preventing public panic. The message from officials is clear. While the current outbreak is geographically contained to specific travel cohorts and their contacts, the biological reality of the no-shield scenario necessitates a return to fundamental public health principles. Vigilance, environmental hygiene, and rapid isolation of symptomatic individuals are currently the only tools available to prevent further loss of life. As researchers work to develop a second-generation vaccine that can address the genetic diversity of the orthohantavirus genus, the global public is advised to stay informed through official channels and adhere to local health directives. For ongoing coverage and deep-dive reports on global health security, consider subscribing to our updates.